Sarah Martinez clutched her worn leather bag tighter as she approached the imposing gates of Riverside Military Academy. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds, and the crisp autumn air carried the distant sound of marching cadets. At 19, she was older than most incoming students, but life had taken unexpected turns that led her here. The academy's towering brick buildings stood like silent sentinels, their windows gleaming in the early light. Sarah had dreamed of this moment for years, though not under these circumstances. Her father, a decorated Marine who had served 3 tours overseas, had always spoken of military service with reverence. He would have been proud to see her here, she thought, if he were still alive. Sarah's journey to this academy had begun 6 months earlier when she received an unexpected phone call that changed everything. Her father, whom she believed had died in combat when she was 12, was actually alive and had been living under a different identity for her protection. The revelation shattered everything she thought she knew about her life, but it also opened doors she never imagined possible. As she walked through the academy gates, other cadets moved around her with purpose and precision. Their uniforms were crisp, their posture perfect, and their expressions focused. Sarah felt out of place in her civilian clothes, carrying a bag that seemed too personal, too civilian for this military environment. The registration process had been surprisingly smooth. Her academic records, though unconventional, met the academy's standards. Her high school grades were excellent, and her college courses, taken while working full-time to support herself, demonstrated determination and intelligence. What truly set her apart, however, was the recommendation letter that had mysteriously appeared with her application materials. The letter bore the signature of General Robert Harrison, a name that carried significant weight in military circles. Sarah had never heard of the man, yet somehow he had written a glowing recommendation describing her character, leadership potential, and family legacy of service. The admissions board had been impressed enough to offer her a full scholarship, despite her late application. Now, standing in the academy courtyard, Sarah wondered if she truly belonged here. The other cadets seemed to move with an inherited confidence, as if military bearing was coded into their DNA. Many came from military families, their fathers and grandfathers having walked these same paths. Sarah, on the other hand, felt like an imposter carrying secrets she didn't fully understand. Her bag contained the few possessions that mattered to her: a small wooden cross that had belonged to her grandmother, a photo of her and her mother taken just before her mother's death 3 years ago, and a letter her father had supposedly written before his death in Afghanistan. She had carried these items through foster homes, cramped apartments, and late-night study sessions in community college libraries. The academy's orientation schedule was rigorous. New cadets were required to report to the administration building for processing, medical examinations, and uniform fitting. Sarah joined a line of nervous-looking young people, all clutching their paperwork and personal belongings. "First-day nerves?" asked a friendly voice beside her. Sarah turned to see a tall young man with kind eyes and an easy smile. His name tag read James Chen, and, unlike the other new cadets, he seemed completely at ease. "Something like that," Sarah replied, managing a smile. "I'm Sarah Martinez." "Nice to meet you, Sarah. My dad went here 20 years ago, so I've been preparing for this my whole life." "What about you? Military family?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent so many years believing her father was dead, and now she was supposed to embrace a military legacy she was only beginning to understand. "It's complicated," she said, which was the understatement of the century. James seemed to sense her discomfort and changed the subject. "The academy has an incredible history. Some of the most decorated officers in the military graduated from here. My dad always said the training here shapes you into something greater than you thought you could be." As they moved closer to the front of the line, Sarah noticed increased activity among the academy staff. Several uniformed officers were moving through the area with clipboards, observing the new cadets with sharp, evaluating eyes. The atmosphere felt more intense than a typical college orientation. When Sarah finally reached the processing desk, a stern-faced sergeant took her paperwork and examined it carefully. His eyes lingered on her name and the signature on her recommendation letter. "Martinez, Sarah Elena," he read aloud. "Report to Building C for additional processing." Additional processing? Sarah asked, confused. The other cadets were being directed to Building A for standard orientation activities. Special circumstances require special procedures, the sergeant replied curtly. Follow the red line on the floor. Room 247. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. She had hoped to blend in, to start fresh without drawing attention to herself. Instead, she was being singled out before she had even officially begun her cadet training. Building C was older than the main administration complex, its corridors lined with portraits of distinguished graduates and display cases filled with military memorabilia. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she followed the red line painted along the floor. Room 247 was small and windowless, containing only a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a flag standing in the corner. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and the insignia of a major on her uniform. Her nameplate read Major Patricia Wells. Please sit, Cadet Martinez, Major Wells said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. I'm the Academy's security coordinator. We need to conduct a routine security screening before you can proceed with orientation. Sarah sat down carefully, placing her bag on the floor beside her chair. Is there a problem with my application? Not exactly a problem, but your situation is unique. We've received some conflicting information about your background, and we need to clarify a few details. Major Wells opened a thick file folder that seemed to contain far more information than Sarah's simple application should have generated. I don't understand. I provided all the required documentation. My transcripts, medical records, everything was submitted according to the instructions. Major Wells studied the papers in front of her for a long moment. Tell me about your father, Cadet Martinez. Your application lists him as deceased, but other sources suggest a different story. Sarah's heart began racing. The phone call 6 months ago had changed her understanding of everything, but she had been sworn to secrecy about her father's true situation. How could the Academy know about information she had barely begun to process herself? My father died when I was 12, she said carefully. At least, that's what I was told until recently. And, what were you told recently? Sarah hesitated. The truth was complicated and potentially dangerous. Her father had been involved in classified operations that required his death to be faked for the protection of his family. She had been contacted by government officials who explained that her father was alive but living under deep cover, and that her acceptance to the Academy was part of a larger plan to bring them back together safely. I was told that he might still be alive, but I don't have any proof or details. Major Wells nodded as if she had expected this answer. I'm going to need to search your personal belongings, Cadet Martinez. This is standard procedure for cadets with special circumstances. Sarah's grip tightened on her bag. The items inside were deeply personal, the only connection she had to her past and the family she had lost. The thought of having them examined by strangers felt like a violation. Is this really necessary? I'm just here to get an education and serve my country. I understand your concerns, but security protocols must be followed. Please place your bag on the desk. Reluctantly, Sarah lifted her bag and set it on the metal surface. Major Wells put on latex gloves and began to carefully remove each item. The wooden cross came out first, followed by the photograph of Sarah and her mother, and, finally, the letter she had treasured for 7 years. Major Wells examined each item with professional detachment, but, when she opened the letter, her expression changed dramatically. She read it twice, then reached for her phone. I need Captain Rodriguez to report to room 247 immediately, she said into the phone. Tell him it's regarding the Martinez situation. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. What's wrong? Is there something in the letter? Please remain calm, Cadet Martinez. We're just following protocol. But Major Wells' tone had shifted from routine to urgent, and Sarah could see tension in her shoulders. The weight felt eternal. Sarah stared at her belongings spread across the desk, wondering what could possibly be significant enough to require additional personnel. The letter had been given to her by her mother before her death, supposedly written by her father before his deployment. She had read it hundreds of times, finding comfort in his words about courage, honor, and the importance of standing up for what was right. The door opened and a man in captain's uniform entered the room. He was in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that immediately focused on Sarah with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Captain Rodriguez moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command, and there was something about his bearing that suggested extensive combat experience. "This is the Martinez cadet?" he asked Major Wells, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "Yes, sir." "You need to see this." Major Wells handed him the letter. Captain Rodriguez read the letter slowly, and Sarah watched his expression change from professional interest to something that looked almost like shock. He read it again, then looked up at Sarah with an expression she couldn't interpret. "Cadet Martinez, where exactly did you get this letter?" "My mother gave it to me before she died. She said my father wrote it before his last deployment." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Captain Rodriguez exchanged a meaningful look with Major Wells. "I need to make a phone call." "Major Wells, please escort the cadet to the secure waiting area." "Sir, I don't understand what's happening. Have I done something wrong?" Sarah felt tears threatening but fought to keep them back. "You haven't done anything wrong, Cadet Martinez. But this situation has become more complex than we initially anticipated. Please cooperate with Major Wells while we sort this out." The secure waiting area turned out to be a small room with comfortable chairs, a water cooler, and no windows. Major Wells remained with Sarah but seemed as confused as she was about the sudden escalation in security protocols. "Major Wells, can you at least tell me if I'm in trouble? Am I going to be kicked out of the academy before I even start?" "I honestly don't know, Cadet." This level of response is unusual, even for special circumstances cases. "But I can tell you that Captain Rodriguez is a good officer. If there's a way to resolve this situation favorably, he'll find it." Hours passed. Sarah was given lunch and allowed to use the bathroom, but always under escort. She began to wonder if coming to the academy had been a terrible mistake. Perhaps she should have stayed in her small apartment, working her retail job and taking community college classes. At least that life had been predictable and safe. Late in the afternoon, the door opened and Captain Rodriguez returned, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a man Sarah had never seen before, yet something about his bearing and the way he carried himself seemed familiar. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and scars on his hands that spoke of hard experience. The stranger's eyes met Sarah's, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. There was recognition there, and pain, and a love so profound it made her chest tighten with emotion she didn't understand. "Sarah," the man said, and his voice cracked slightly on her name. "My God, you look just like your mother." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "Cadet Martinez, I'd like you to meet Colonel Michael Torres. I believe you knew him by a different name." Sarah stared at the man in front of her, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The photo she had carried for 7 years showed a younger man in military dress uniform, but the eyes were the same. The shape of his face, the way he stood, even the small scar above his left eyebrow that she had traced with her finger in the photograph countless times. "Dad?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Colonel Torres took a step toward her, then stopped, as if uncertain whether he had the right to close the distance between them. "Hello, sweetheart. I know this must be confusing and frightening. I know you have questions." Sarah felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about her father's death, about her own identity, was crumbling and reforming in real time. "You're alive. You're really alive." She stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. "But they told me you died. I went to your funeral. I watched them lower your coffin into the ground. I know. I was there, watching from a distance. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but it was the only way to keep you and your mother safe." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father had been alive all these years, had let her grieve for him, had allowed her to grow up believing she was an orphan. The anger that rose in her chest was immediate and fierce. Safe from what? What could possibly justify letting a 12-year-old girl think her father was dead? Colonel Torres' expression was pained but resolute. I was involved in operations that made powerful enemies, Sarah. People who would have used you and your mother to get to me. My death had to be real, complete, and permanent. It was the only way to protect you. But Mom died anyway. 3 years ago. From cancer. She died believing she was a widow, and I had to face it alone because I thought you were already gone. Sarah's voice was rising, and she didn't care who heard her. The news of his wife's death hit Colonel Torres like a physical blow. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his face pale and stricken. I didn't know, he whispered. The people who managed my new identity were supposed to keep me informed about major events in your lives, but they never told me Linda was sick. The room fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's ragged breathing. Captain Rodriguez and Major Wells stood quietly by the door, giving the reunited family space to process the overwhelming emotions of the moment. Why now? Sarah finally asked. Why reveal yourself now? Why did you arrange for me to come here? Colonel Torres looked up at her with eyes full of regret and love. Because the threat that forced me into hiding is finally over. The operation I was involved in, the people I was protecting our country from, they've all been neutralized. I've spent 7 years living as someone else, unable to contact you, unable to be part of your life. But now it's safe. Now I can be your father again, if you'll let me. Sarah sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. The letter in my bag. The one that caused all this attention. What was so special about it? It contained a code, Colonel Torres explained. A specific sequence of words that would identify you as my daughter to certain people in the military community. Your mother didn't know what it meant, but I embedded it in the letter in case something like this ever happened. When Captain Rodriguez saw it, he knew exactly who you were and who your father was. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. Your father is something of a legend in special operations circles, Cadet Martinez. His work saved countless lives and prevented several major terrorist attacks. When we realized who you were, we had to bring him here. He's been living under the name Michael Torres for the past 7 years, working as a military contractor in South America. Sarah looked at the man who was her father, trying to reconcile the memory of the young soldier in her photograph with the weathered colonel sitting before her. 7 years of separation stretched between them like a chasm she didn't know how to cross. I don't know how to do this, she admitted quietly. I don't know how to just start being your daughter again. I've been alone for so long, I don't remember what it feels like to have a family. Colonel Torres reached out slowly and took her hand. His was calloused and scarred, but warm and gentle. We don't have to figure it all out today, sweetheart. We have time now. All the time in the world. But what about the academy? Am I still going to be a cadet here? That's entirely up to you, Captain Rodriguez said. Your acceptance here was legitimate. Your grades and test scores earned your place, not your family connections. But now that your situation has changed, you have options you didn't have before. Sarah looked around the room at the 3 people who had just turned her world upside down. The academy life she had imagined for herself suddenly seemed uncertain and strange. But the alternative, leaving with a father she barely knew to rebuild a relationship that had been shattered by 7 years of necessary deception, seemed equally daunting. I need time to think, she said finally. This is all happening so fast. Of course, Colonel Torres said. Why don't you continue with your orientation activities today? Get a feel for the academy, meet some of your fellow cadets. We can talk tonight, and you can ask me all the questions I know you must have. Sarah nodded, though her mind was reeling with more questions than she knew how to ask. As Major Wells prepared to escort her back to the main orientation activities, Sarah realized that this day had changed everything. Whether she stayed at the academy or not, whether she could rebuild a relationship with her father or not, she was no longer the orphan girl who had walked through the academy gates that morning. She was the daughter of Colonel Michael Torres, a decorated war hero whose classified operations had shaped events she would probably never fully understand. She was part of a military legacy that stretched back through generations of service and sacrifice. Most importantly, she was no longer alone in the world. The remainder of Sarah's first day at the academy passed in a blur of orientation activities, uniform fittings, and administrative procedures. She moved through the motions mechanically, her mind still reeling from the earth-shattering revelation that her father was alive. Fellow cadets tried to engage her in conversation, but she found it difficult to focus on anything beyond the surreal events in room 247. James Chen found her during dinner in the mess hall, where she sat alone picking at her food without appetite. "You disappeared after morning registration," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of his comment wasn't lost on Sarah. "Something like that," she murmured, managing a weak smile. "Just family stuff." "Well, you missed quite an orientation. They gave us the full tour: academic buildings, dormitories, training facilities. The obstacle course looks absolutely brutal. There's also a tradition where second-year cadets try to intimidate the new arrivals, but most of it seems like harmless hazing." Sarah nodded absently, wondering how to explain that her entire world had been reconstructed in the span of a few hours. How could she tell this earnest young man that her supposedly dead father was actually a classified military operative who had been living under an assumed identity for 7 years? "Sarah, you're really not here, are you?" James said gently. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm a pretty good listener. Military families can be complicated." "That's an understatement," Sarah replied, finally, meeting his eyes. "James, what would you do if everything you believed about your family turned out to be a lie designed to protect you?" James considered this seriously. "I guess it would depend on whether the lie was told out of love or selfishness. And whether learning the truth made things better or worse. What if you couldn't tell yet? What if the truth was so big and complicated that you didn't know how to process it? Then, I'd probably take it one day at a time and try to focus on what I could control," James said. "Is your family situation affecting whether you stay at the academy?" The question hit at the heart of Sarah's uncertainty. Just that morning, the academy had represented her chance at a new beginning, an opportunity to build a future based on discipline, service, and the military values her father had instilled in her before his supposed death. Now, with her father alive and the circumstances of his disappearance explained, she had other options. "I honestly don't know," she admitted. "This morning I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. Now I'm not sure about anything." After dinner, Sarah was escorted by Major Wells to a small apartment in the officers' quarters where her father was staying. The space was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with a small living area, kitchenette, and bedroom. Colonel Torres had changed from his uniform into civilian clothes, and somehow this made him seem both more approachable and more foreign to her. "I ordered some Chinese food," he said nervously. "I remember you used to love sweet and sour chicken, but I don't know if your tastes have changed." Sarah was touched that he remembered this detail from her childhood, but it also highlighted how much they didn't know about each other anymore. "I still like Chinese food," she said, settling onto the couch across from him. They ate in awkward silence for a few minutes before Sarah finally gathered the courage to ask the questions that had been burning in her mind all day. "Tell me about the operation that made you disappear. I need to understand what was so important that it required you to abandon your family." Colonel Torres set down his chopsticks and looked at her directly. "In 2016, I was part of a joint task force investigating a network of international arms dealers who were supplying weapons to terrorist organizations across the Middle East and Southeast Asia. The operation, codenamed Iron Eagle, took 2 years to develop and involved agents from multiple intelligence agencies." He paused, as if weighing how much classified information he could safely share with her. The leaders of this network had connections to organized crime, corrupt government officials, and terrorist cells in over a dozen countries. They were responsible for weapons that killed hundreds of American soldiers and thousands of innocent civilians. "When we finally moved to dismantle the network,
we discovered that they had infiltrated our operation from the beginning.
Sarah listened intently, beginning to understand the magnitude of what her father had been involved in. Several of our agents were killed before we realized we had been compromised. The surviving team members were offered a choice: fake our deaths and live under new identities until the network could be completely eliminated, or risk not just our own lives, but the lives of our families.
How long were you supposed to stay hidden?
The original plan was 2 years.
But every time we thought we had eliminated the threat, new connections would emerge. Cell leaders would be replaced by even more dangerous operators.
It became clear that this wasn't just a criminal organization, it was a hydra with tentacles reaching into the highest levels of government and military command in several countries.
Colonel Torres stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the academy grounds.
I spent 7 years hunting down every last member of this network, Sarah. 7 years living as someone else, taking contracts in South America and Asia, following leads and eliminating threats piece by piece.
And now it's over?
6 months ago, we finally identified and neutralized the last cell leader.
The organization is completely dismantled. The weapons supply lines have been cut.
The threat that forced me into hiding no longer exists.
Sarah tried to process the scope of her father's sacrifice.
He had given up 7 years of his life, missed her entire teenage years and her mother's death, all to protect people he would never meet from threats they would never know existed.
Why didn't you contact me after Mom died?
I was alone, Dad. I was 18 years old with no family, no support system, trying to figure out how to pay for her funeral and continue my education. The pain in Colonel Torres' eyes was profound. I didn't know she had died until today. The handlers who were supposed to keep me informed about your lives failed me at the most critical moment. If I had known Linda was sick, I would have found a way to come back, regardless of the risks.
What would you have done differently?
I would have brought both of you into protective custody. I would have found a way to be there for her final months, and I would have made sure you weren't alone during the most difficult time of your life. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of grief for all the lost time rather than anger.
She never stopped loving you.
Even when she was dying, she talked about you like you might walk through the door any minute. She kept your picture on her nightstand and wore her wedding ring until the day she died. Colonel Torres sat down heavily, his composure finally cracking.
I loved your mother more than life itself.
Letting her believe I was dead, knowing she was mourning me while I was alive and unable to comfort her, it nearly destroyed me. There were nights when I almost broke cover just to call her, to tell her I was okay.
Why didn't you?
Because one phone call could have unraveled years of work and put both of you in mortal danger. The people we were hunting had resources and connections that most people can't imagine. They would have killed you both without hesitation if they had discovered you were still important to me. Sarah began to understand the impossible position her father had been in. Every choice had required sacrificing something precious for something necessary. The academy, she said suddenly.
How did you arrange for me to be accepted here? General Harrison's recommendation letter, that was you, wasn't it? Colonel Torres nodded.
General Harrison is an old friend who owed me several favors. When I learned that you were struggling financially but maintaining excellent grades, I asked him to help. The recommendation was legitimate, it was based on reports I had been receiving about your character and academic performance.
You've been watching me? From a distance.
I needed to know you were safe and that you were becoming the remarkable young woman I always knew you would be.
I'm proud of you, Sarah.
The way you've handled losing your mother, supporting yourself, pursuing your education despite enormous obstacles, you've shown the kind of courage and determination that can't be taught. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions: gratitude that her father had been looking out for her, anger that he had done so secretly, and confusion about what this meant for her future.
So what happens now? Do I continue with the academy, or do we try to rebuild our relationship? Can I do both?
That depends entirely on what you want, Colonel Torres said. I have enough saved from my contractor work to support your education wherever you choose to pursue it. You could come with me. I'm planning to settle somewhere quiet and try to build a normal life for the first time in 7 years. Or you could continue here and we could work on getting to know each other again during breaks and holidays.
What do you think I should do?
I think you should follow your instincts. You applied to this academy for reasons that had nothing to do with me.
If those reasons are still valid, then you should stay.
If learning the truth about your family has changed what you want, then you should take time to figure out what matters most to you. Sarah looked around the sparse apartment, trying to imagine building a relationship with this man who was both her father and a stranger. The life he was offering represented security, family, and answers to questions she had carried for 7 years.
But it also represented the unknown.
The academy, on the other hand, was a known challenge. She had prepared for military life, studied the curriculum, and imagined herself as part of a community dedicated to service and excellence. Leaving now would mean abandoning a dream she had worked years to achieve.
Can I ask you something about military service? About whether it's worth the sacrifices?
Of course. You gave up 7 years with your family to serve your country.
You missed Mom's death and my entire transition to adulthood. Knowing what you know now, would you make the same choice?
Colonel Torres was quiet for a long time, considering the weight of her question.
That's the hardest question you could ask me, he said finally. The operation I was part of prevented weapons from reaching terrorist organizations that would have used them to kill innocent people.
The intelligence we gathered led to the prevention of at least 3 major terrorist attacks that would have cost hundreds of lives. He paused, looking directly at her. But I also missed the chance to hold your mother's hand as she died, and I wasn't there to help you through the most difficult period of your life. I don't know if there's a moral calculus that can weigh those competing values. So how do I decide whether military service is worth similar sacrifices?
I think the question isn't whether service requires sacrifice, it does.
The question is whether the particular type of service you're choosing aligns with your values and gives your life meaning.
Not all military careers involve the kind of extreme circumstances I faced.
Most officers serve with honor and distinction while maintaining normal family lives.
Sarah nodded, appreciating his honesty. I need some time to think about all of this. Take all the time you need. I've waited 7 years to be your father again. I can wait a little longer while you figure out what's best for your future.
That night, Sarah lay in her assigned dormitory room staring at the ceiling while her roommate slept peacefully in the bed across from her. The events of the day felt surreal, like something from a novel rather than her actual life. Her father was alive. The man she had mourned for 7 years had been living under an assumed identity, conducting classified operations that protected national security. Her acceptance to the academy wasn't just based on her own merit, it was also the result of connections and circumstances she had known nothing about. But what troubled her most was the question of what she truly wanted. For years, she had imagined her father as a heroic figure who had died serving his country. That image had inspired her own desire for military service, her commitment to honor his memory through her own dedication to duty and service. Now she knew that her father was very much alive, and that his service had required sacrifices she was only beginning to understand. The romantic notion of military heroism had been replaced by a complex reality of impossible choices and moral ambiguity. The next morning brought the first full day of cadet training. Sarah joined her fellow cadets for an early morning run around the academy grounds, followed by basic drill and ceremony instruction. The physical demands of the training were significant, but not beyond her capabilities. More challenging was the mental adjustment to military discipline and structure. During lunch, she found herself sitting with James and several other new cadets who had begun forming the bonds that would sustain them through the rigorous academy experience.
Martinez looks like she's somewhere else again, observed a cadet named Rebecca Walsh, a confident young woman from Texas whose father was a Navy pilot. Are you sure you're cut out for this place?
The question stung because it echoed Sarah's own doubts. I'm just processing some family news, she said defensively. We're all processing something, said David Kim, another new cadet. That's what the first year is for, figuring out if we belong here and what kind of officers we want to become.
James looked at Sarah with concern. Did you get bad news from home?
Not bad exactly.
Just complicated.
Sarah pushed her food around her plate, still struggling with her appetite. My older brother graduated from here 3 years ago, Rebecca said, her tone gentler than before. He told me that the first few weeks are the hardest because you're not just learning military skills, you're learning who you are when everything familiar gets stripped away. That afternoon, during a break between classes, Sarah was summoned to Captain Rodriguez's office. She found him behind his desk reviewing what appeared to be her file. "How are you adjusting, Cadet Martinez?" "It's been a challenging transition, sir." "I imagine it has. Have you had a chance to discuss your situation with your father?" "Yes, sir." He explained the circumstances of his disappearance and the operation he was involved in. Captain Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "Your father is a remarkable man, Cadet Martinez. His work saved countless lives, though he'll never receive public recognition for it. The sacrifice he made, and that your family made, is the kind of service this academy seeks to instill in its graduates." "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think I'm here for the right reasons?" "My application was based on honoring my father's memory and following in his footsteps. Now that I know he's alive and that his path was much more complex than I understood, I'm not sure what my motivation should be." Captain Rodriguez considered her question carefully. "Cadet Martinez, motivation is important, but it's not static. Many cadets arrive here with one set of reasons and graduate with entirely different convictions about service. The question isn't whether your original motivations were perfect, it's whether you're open to discovering what kind of officer you might become." "How do I know if I'm cut out for this?" "Give it time. Military leadership isn't about having all the answers from day one. It's about developing the character, skills, and judgment to make difficult decisions under pressure. Based on what I've seen of your academic record and how you've handled the revelation about your father, you have the foundational qualities we look for." Sarah felt a small measure of reassurance, but she was still far from certain about her path forward. That evening, she had dinner again with her father. This time, their conversation was less intense, focused on catching up on the details of their lives during the years they had been separated. "Tell me about college," Colonel Torres said. "Your transcripts show excellent grades, but I want to know what you enjoyed studying." "I loved my literature and history classes," Sarah said. "There was something appealing about understanding how people in different times and places dealt with moral dilemmas and impossible choices." "That's excellent preparation for military leadership," her father observed. "The best officers are often those who understand human nature and can learn from the experiences of others." "What about you? What was your favorite part of military service, before everything became so complicated?" Colonel Torres smiled, and, for the first time, Sarah caught a glimpse of the father she remembered from her childhood. "I loved training junior officers," he said. "There's something incredibly rewarding about watching a young person discover their own capabilities and develop the confidence to lead others. Some of the officers I mentored early in my career have gone on to command positions that shape military policy." "Do you miss it? The normal parts of military life?" "Every day. The brotherhood, the sense of shared purpose, the feeling that your work matters, those are the things that make military service meaningful. The classified operations were necessary, but they weren't the heart of what I loved about being a soldier." Sarah realized that this conversation was helping her separate her father's unique experience from the broader question of whether military service was right for her. "Dad, can I ask you to do something for me?" "Anything. Can you give me 2 weeks to experience the academy without any contact between us? I need to figure out if I want to be here based on my own reactions to military life, not because of our relationship or what I think you want me to do." Colonel Torres looked surprised but nodded slowly. "That's a very mature request. Are you sure you don't want to be able to call me if you need support?" "I've been on my own for 3 years. I know I can handle 2 weeks. But I need to know that my decision, whether to stay or leave, is truly mine." "All right. But I want you to know that I'll support whatever choice you make. If you decide the academy isn't for you, that doesn't diminish my pride in you or change my love for you." "And if I decide to stay?"
Then, I'll be here when you graduate, and I'll be the proudest father in the audience. Sarah hugged him goodnight, feeling for the first time since their reunion that she had some control over her circumstances. The next 2 weeks would be challenging, but they would also be illuminating. By the end of that period, she would know whether Sarah Martinez belonged at Riverside Military Academy. The 2 weeks that followed were the most challenging and transformative of Sarah's life. Without the emotional complexity of her father's presence, she threw herself completely into the rigorous demands of academy life. Each day began at 0530 with physical training, followed by academic classes, military instruction, and leadership exercises that pushed cadets to their mental and physical limits. The Academy's philosophy was based on breaking down civilian mindsets and rebuilding them with military discipline, honor, and commitment to service. For Sarah, this process was particularly intense because she was simultaneously processing the revelation about her father while discovering her own capabilities and limitations. During her third day of training, Sarah's platoon was assigned a field exercise that would test their ability to work as a team under pressure. The scenario involved a simulated rescue mission where cadets had to navigate difficult terrain, solve tactical problems, and demonstrate leadership under simulated combat conditions. Sarah found herself assigned as squad leader for the exercise, a responsibility that terrified her. She had never commanded anyone in her life, and the thought of being responsible for the success or failure of her fellow cadets was overwhelming. "Martinez, you look like you're about to throw up," observed Rebecca Walsh as they prepared their equipment. "It's just a training exercise." "Easy for you to say," Sarah replied. "You grew up around military leadership." "I'm making this up as I go along." "That's what we're all doing," said James Chen. "The point isn't to be perfect, it's to learn from our mistakes and get better." The exercise began at dawn with Sarah's squad tasked with reaching an objective 3 miles through dense forest while avoiding enemy positions manned by upperclassmen. Sarah had studied the maps and developed what she thought was a sound tactical plan, but within the first hour, everything began to go wrong. The route she had chosen proved more difficult than anticipated, with steep ravines and thick undergrowth that slowed their progress significantly. Worse, they encountered an unexpected enemy position that forced them to take a lengthy detour. Sarah watched their timeline slip away and felt panic rising in her chest. "We're never going to make the objective on time," whispered David Kim during a brief rest stop. "Maybe we should try to move faster and hope we don't run into more opposition." Sarah looked at her exhausted squad members and realized that pushing them harder might result in injuries or poor decision-making that would make their situation even worse. She had to make a leadership decision with incomplete information and significant pressure, exactly the kind of scenario her father had faced countless times during his career. "We're going to stick with the original plan," she decided. "Moving faster will make us more likely to stumble into ambushes and more likely to make mistakes. We might be late reaching the objective, but we'll get there safely and ready to complete the mission." Rebecca looked skeptical. "The instructors are going to hammer us for poor time management." "Maybe," Sarah acknowledged. "But they'll hammer us worse if we take casualties because we rushed into avoidable dangers." The decision proved correct. Sarah's squad reached the objective 40 minutes behind schedule, but with all members healthy and alert. Moreover, they had avoided 3 additional enemy positions that had captured or eliminated other squads who had attempted more direct but riskier routes. The after-action review was conducted by Captain Rodriguez, who analyzed each squad's performance in detail. "Cadet Martinez," he said when he reached Sarah's squad, "your team had the slowest time to objective. Explain your decision-making process." Sarah stood at attention, ready to accept responsibility for their performance. "Sir, when we encountered unexpected obstacles, I had to choose between speed and safety. I determined that arriving late with a full squad ready to fight was preferable to arriving on time with depleted capabilities." "And you were willing to accept a negative evaluation for poor time management?" "Yes, sir. The mission required reaching the objective and completing the task. Time was important, but it wasn't the only factor." Captain Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Cadet Martinez demonstrated mature tactical judgment. In real combat situations, leaders often face competing priorities.
The ability to weigh risks and benefits quickly and make decisions you can defend is more important than following rigid timelines. The experience gave Sarah her first taste of military leadership and helped her understand what her father had meant about the satisfaction of guiding others through difficult challenges. However, not all of her academy experiences were positive. During her second week, Sarah struggled significantly with weapons training. The academy required all cadets to demonstrate proficiency with various firearms, and Sarah discovered that she had a profound psychological barrier to handling weapons. Every time she picked up a rifle, images flashed through her mind of her father's supposed death in Afghanistan. She knew intellectually that he was alive and safe, but her emotional response to weapons was visceral and overwhelming. During live-fire exercises, her hands would shake and her vision would blur with tears she couldn't control. Master Sergeant Williams, the Academy's weapons instructor, noticed her difficulties immediately. "Martinez, you're gripping that rifle like it's going to bite you," he said during one particularly frustrating session. "What's your problem with firearms?" "I'm not sure, Sergeant. I just can't seem to get comfortable with them." "Have you ever fired a weapon before?" "No, Sergeant. Never." "Well, that's unusual for someone applying to a military academy. Most cadets have at least some shooting experience. Did your family not own firearms?" Sarah felt trapped. She couldn't explain that her discomfort stemmed from traumatic associations with her father's supposed death without revealing classified information about his true circumstances. "My family situation was complicated, Sergeant." Master Sergeant Williams studied her for a moment, then assigned her additional training time with a patient corporal who specialized in working with cadets who had weapons anxiety. Corporal Jennifer Hayes proved to be exactly what Sarah needed. Rather than pushing her to overcome her fears through repetition, Corporal Hayes helped her understand the psychological roots of her anxiety and develop coping strategies. "It's not unusual for people to have strong emotional reactions to weapons," Corporal Hayes explained during one of their sessions. "Sometimes it's related to traumatic experiences, sometimes to moral objections to violence, and sometimes to fears about their own capabilities." "What if it's all three?" Sarah asked. "Then, we work through them one at a time. The academy isn't trying to turn you into someone who enjoys violence. We're trying to ensure that you can effectively protect yourself and others when necessary." Slowly, with patient guidance, Sarah began to overcome her weapons anxiety. She learned to separate the tool from her emotional associations with violence and death. More importantly, she began to understand that military service wasn't primarily about fighting, it was about being prepared to protect others when peaceful solutions weren't possible. Her breakthrough came during a night training exercise when her squad encountered a scenario involving civilian hostages. Sarah found herself in command of a team tasked with neutralizing threats while ensuring the safety of innocent people. In that moment, her weapons training stopped being about overcoming fear and became about accepting responsibility for other people's lives. She performed flawlessly, making precise tactical decisions and demonstrating the marksmanship skills that had eluded her during training. When the exercise ended, she realized that she had found the psychological framework that made military service meaningful to her. "Outstanding performance, Cadet Martinez," Captain Rodriguez told her after the exercise. "You showed exactly the kind of judgment and capability we expect from future officers." But perhaps the most important moment of Sarah's 2-week trial period came during a late-night conversation with her roommate, Ashley Morgan. Ashley was a quiet cadet from a military family who rarely spoke about her personal life but had observed Sarah's struggles with patient understanding. "You're going to stay, aren't you?" Ashley said one night as they prepared for bed. "What makes you think that? You stopped fighting the training about a week ago. Now you're embracing it. That's usually when cadets know they belong here." Sarah considered this observation. It was true that her resistance to academy life had gradually transformed into engagement and enthusiasm. "I think I finally understand what military leadership means," she said. "It's not about following orders blindly or proving you're tough. It's about taking responsibility for other people's welfare and being willing to make difficult decisions for the greater good." That's a pretty mature understanding for someone who's been here less than 2 weeks. I had some help figuring it out, Sarah said, thinking about her father's sacrifices and the conversations that had helped her understand the broader meaning of service. On her final night before the 2-week period ended, Sarah sat alone in the Academy's chapel, a beautiful space that provided sanctuary for cadets of all faiths. She needed quiet time to process everything she had learned about herself and reach a final decision about her future. The past 2 weeks had shown her that she was capable of military leadership and that she found deep satisfaction in protecting others and solving complex problems under pressure. She had also discovered that her father's example, his willingness to sacrifice personal happiness for the greater good, was something she admired and wanted to emulate in her own way. But she had also learned that military service required a level of commitment that would shape every aspect of her life. If she chose to continue at the academy and pursue a military career, she would be accepting the possibility of deployments, dangerous assignments, and personal sacrifices similar to those her father had made. The question was whether she was ready for that level of commitment and whether the potential rewards, the opportunity to serve something greater than herself, justified the risks and sacrifices. As she sat in the peaceful chapel, Sarah realized that she had already found her answer. The past 2 weeks hadn't just shown her that she could succeed at the academy, they had shown her that military service aligned with her deepest values and aspirations. She wanted to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. She wanted to be part of an organization dedicated to preserving freedom and democracy. She wanted to follow in her father's footsteps, not because of family obligation, but because she had discovered that military leadership was her true calling. The next morning, Sarah met her father for breakfast at a small restaurant near the academy. He looked nervous, as if he was preparing himself for disappointment. "So," he said, stirring his coffee absently, "have you made your decision?" "I'm staying," Sarah said simply. Colonel Torres' face broke into a smile of pure joy. "Are you sure? This isn't about pleasing me or honoring some family tradition?" "I'm sure. These 2 weeks showed me that I belong here. Military leadership isn't just something I can do, it's something I need to do. It gives my life meaning in a way that nothing else has." "I'm incredibly proud of you," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I also want you to understand the challenges ahead. Military life isn't easy, and, for women, it can be especially difficult." "I know. But I also know that the military needs officers who are willing to make ethical decisions under pressure and who understand that leadership means serving others, not advancing your own interests." Colonel Torres nodded. "You sound like your mother. She always said that the most important question isn't whether you can do something, but whether you should do it." "Will you stay in the area while I'm at the academy?" Sarah asked. "I was thinking about buying a small house about an hour away. Close enough to attend your graduation and important events, but far enough away that you can build your own identity here without everyone knowing you're my daughter." "I'd like that. I want us to rebuild our relationship, but I also want to earn my place here based on my own merit." "That's exactly what you're doing. And, Sarah, I want you to know that regardless of what path your military career takes, I'm going to be here for you in a way I couldn't be for the past 7 years. Sarah felt tears of happiness welling in her eyes. "I love you, Dad. I know the choices you made were necessary, and I forgive you for all the time we lost." "I love you too, sweetheart. More than I can express." As they finished breakfast and prepared to part ways, Sarah felt a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced since her mother's death. She had her father back, she had found her purpose in life, and she had the opportunity to build a career dedicated to service and leadership. But, perhaps most importantly, she had discovered that her own strength and character were more than equal to the challenges ahead. The frightened young woman who had arrived at the academy 2 weeks earlier had been transformed into someone ready to embrace the demands and rewards of military life. 3 months later, Sarah stood in formation with her fellow cadets during a formal parade ceremony. Her parents, both of them, were in the audience, having been officially reunited when Colonel Torres completed his transition back to his real identity. Her mother would have been proud, Sarah thought as she executed the precise drill movements she had practiced hundreds of times. Linda Martinez had raised a daughter who understood the value of service and sacrifice, even though she hadn't lived to see how those lessons would shape Sarah's life. As the ceremony concluded and cadets were dismissed to spend time with visiting family members, Sarah walked toward her father with confidence and purpose.
She was no longer the lost young woman searching for meaning and belonging.
She was Cadet Sarah Martinez, future officer in the United States military, daughter of a decorated veteran, and a young woman ready to write her own chapter in the family legacy of service.
"How does it feel?"
Colonel Torres asked as he embraced his daughter.
"Like coming home," Sarah replied, and she meant it completely.
The academy had given her more than military training and education. It had given her a community of like-minded individuals dedicated to protecting others and preserving the values that made their country worth defending. It had shown her that the sacrifices required by military service weren't just acceptable, they were honorable. Most importantly, it had helped her understand that her father's example of service and sacrifice wasn't a burden to carry, but a legacy to build upon. She would face her own challenges and make her own difficult decisions, but she would do so with the knowledge that she was part of something greater than herself. As she walked across the academy grounds with her father, sharing stories about her training and discussing her plans for the future, Sarah realized that her journey was really just beginning. The academy was preparing her for a lifetime of leadership and service, and she was ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. The frightened girl who had clutched her bag at the academy gates was gone forever. In her place stood a young woman who understood her purpose and was prepared to dedicate her life to serving others. The transformation had been difficult, but it had also been necessary. Sarah Martinez had found her way home.